Hey everyone, it's Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series between authors. And I know I always say, authors of all backgrounds, and that's true. I've had science authors on here. I've had poets on here, nonfiction, and all sorts of different stuff. But I will say I do tend to gravitate towards thriller writers, mystery writers, suspense writers, mostly because I know a lot of them. And so it's fun to kind of catch up with them and pick their brains. I think I have more in common with them. So it's fun it's helpful for the conversation for me to have that relatability where we kind of have similar experiences. And today's guest, I felt like we've had a lot of similar experiences, and certainly in terms of what we write and kind of starting writing without really having a background in writing, and trying to kind of navigate not only the process of writing itself and how do you write a book, but the navigating the actually publishing industry, which is a difficult thing to do. So today I spoke to Kimberly Belle. She's the USA Today and internationally best-selling author of 9 novels. All, I don't know if they're all kind of domestic suspense, psychological thrillers, but I know probably the preponderance of them are. And she's sold over 1 million copies worldwide, and some of them have been optioned for film and television. So she was great to talk to. It's interesting to hear her, her journey from being a psychology major to working in charitable foundations for years and years and years, both abroad and in the United States, to then kind of having that moment of getting laid off during the great financial crisis and saying, look, I always had this story in my head. I want to see if I can actually sit down and write it, which is a lot of work to do when you don't know what you're doing. And that's kind of the place that I came from. So it was fun kind of relating to her a bit about that. And so she has multiple books out. Her recent one that came out just at the end of 2022 is The Personal Assistant. So you're going to like this one. She is a wealth of information, and if you're an aspiring writer, listen in, because she's got a ton of great advice. This is my conversation with Kimberly Belle. Looks like a law library behind you.
Well, kind of some antique books mixed with new books, mixed with my old books. It's a little bit of everything.
Are you an antique book fan? Like, do you go to like just antique stores and you can just smell those old books and you have to have them?
Well, I do love looking at them, but these are actually from my grandfather-in-law. So he collected books.
Yep. Exact same story with me with my grandmother. And she was just going to I'm just going to throw these away. I'm like, what?
No,
these are from
they're gorgeous.
They're
right?
Gorgeous. Yeah. Even if they're not worth much and they're, old 19th century, whatever. But,
right.
But yeah. And there's something about the smell of 100-year-old books that you just wow.
I agree. And like the real leather on the outside.
Yep. Totally. So where are you?
I'm in Atlanta.
Atlanta. Okay. And did you grow up in Atlanta?
No, I grew up in Tennessee. So it's about a 5-hour drive from here. And then I ended up coming here for college and then moved away for a bunch of years. And now I'm back. So
whereabouts in Tennessee did you grow up? I'm a little familiar with Tennessee.
Kingsport. Do you know Kingsport?
I don't know Kingsport.
Part of the Tri-Cities Upper East. So Kingsport, Bristol, and Johnson City. Bristol, the birthplace of country music.
What makes the birthplace of country? Like what was the seminal event that happened that made that the birthplace?
It was people who lived there, and I couldn't tell you who they are. My father could fill you in tell you more than you ever wanted to know. But,
you're not a country music guy. You don't follow her?
No, here and there occasionally, but yeah. I don't know all the old country music stuff.
So was Kingsport a small town, or?
They're pretty small. You have Eastern Tennessee State University in Johnson City, which is, my parents kind of lived in between Kingsport and Johnson City. So, you do have a college town. brings in a little more people. And Kingsport had Eastman Chemical Company and Eastman Kodak.
Oh,
So
okay.
that brought in a lot of people from outside the South even. So yeah.
Were your parents working for Eastman, or what
My
was?
dad was,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah,
What?
he's a chemist. So, yeah. And, I mean, so you had lots of people from all over the place, but, you're in the middle of very rural area up against
Mhm.
the Appalachians.
Beautiful.
Appalachian Trail is right there. It's gorgeous. If you love
Yeah.
hiking, you are good to go there.
And so so that was, you had a pretty rural upbringing. And did you, I'm curious about what kind of your roots of creativity were, and how that was kind of influenced by your childhood.
Yeah, so it wasn't anything to do with where I grew up because I was actually that kid who graduated from college and I was like, see ya, and I was out of
Yeah.
there. I never wanted to stay I'm a big city girl and I
Mhm.
grew up in a small town, so go figure, I don't know. But the stories and the storytelling is something that was very much part of my family growing up, and especially my dad, who would always tell us bedtime stories and the craziest stories, and he would just make them up off the cuff. I cannot do that. I
Mhm.
need, a plot and, a roadmap and lots of notes and lots of thinking
Wait till
time.
we get to the storytelling later.
But he would just kind of shake them out of his sleeve and tell stories. So that was just something I've always loved.
Was there a particular, because I did the same thing with my kids, and I had a particular story that just like, okay, it's going to start here and maybe this takes months. I don't know where it goes, but it's the same thread of a story. Was there that with your father's storytelling?
It was mostly like, compact stories at nighttime from what I can remember, but there is one story that we asked for all the time, my brother and I, and it was about, and it was also which is funny. I'm not like into sci-fi or anything, but it had to do with aliens coming down and sucking
Mhm.
the brains of the people. And, so it was scary. It was a little tense and we just loved it. And so he probably told it a million times. I'm sure he's like, that story again.
Yeah, yeah. But he instilled the roots of psychological thrillers
For
and
sure. Yeah,
and the
for
dark
sure.
side of things. Because people, I mean, I'm sure you get this a lot too. And I was like, well,
Yeah.
why do you gravitate towards that? And I'm like, that's what just comes to my mind. It's not like I'm consciously thinking like, let's do a romance novel or whatever.
Right.
It's like I
Yeah.
just want to write about kind of dark conflict and see what
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah, I think partly for me, it's, those are the kind of stories I like to read. And maybe it does have to do with, those are the kind of stories I grew up on, is the tense and exciting, a little nerve-wracking stories where something big and bad happens. But for me, it's also kind of like, making sense of crazy things that happen in the world and all the bad things that can happen. And maybe, being able to craft a story where, I don't know, my stories don't have necessarily happy endings and they're not tied up in neat bows, but they definitely have, a positive upswing at the end. And so maybe that's part of the reason too. I don't know. I probably should ask a therapist.
Well, and I'm the same way. And the endings are always more uplifting to me than they're perceived by almost anybody else. They're like, wow, that was,
Right?
I'm like,
Yes.
no, that was such a hopeful ending. Are you kidding me? And because I don't know why. And the same thing with mysteries. And I wonder if you get into this too. It's like, depending on how you're marketed as a thriller writer, mystery readers will pick you up and expect the dead body on page one and it all to be neatly tied up at the end, and mine never are. And I'm like, I wasn't trying to do that, but still people get frustrated if it's not. Do you get
Mhm.
mail about that?
I mean, you can't make everybody happy. And like you said, I'll think that, oh, this is a nice little, positive ending for my main character. And then I'll get like, why did so and so have to die? Or I really wanted him to be a good guy, or, all these things. You can't make everybody happy, which, I really don't really try to make everybody happy. I try to write the story that is like trying to get outside of me
Right.
and put it on paper in a way that's interesting and compelling enough to go all the way to page 300 and whatever,
Well,
to the
yeah,
end.
the story, without the story being interesting to you,
Right.
it's not fun. There's no,
For sure.
and I always say there's no joy in it. Like the joy is in like entertaining yourself and kind of just hope that it'll sell, it'll entertain others. But, if you try to be
Translate.
formulaic about it, it's just homework. And
Yeah, it's true. It's
that's no
true.
fun.
Yeah.
So
And some stories are more fun to write than others. They come out easier. Those are the ones that are, for me, fun to write. Then there are other stories where I'm like banging my head on the wall and have to really work to figure out what it is I'm trying to say. So
isn't that weird though, that you do have those disparate kind of stories? And because you might try to say, I want to, here's a story that I feel is challenging, but it's so interesting to me, but it's so difficult to write. And another one that does kind of just pour out of you. And maybe it's a little bit more straightforward, but you would think they would all be kind of, you would have the same experience writing each time, but it's totally not.
it's totally not. And for me, it seems to be a pattern where I have one easy one and then one hard one and one easy one hard one. So I don't know what that's about, but so far it's held up. I don't know.
Yeah. And I wonder sometimes if it's who you choose to write the point of view from, does that make, because someone's like, I don't know if I can get so deep in the head of this person as I want to, because I just wrote a book that was a 21-year-old female savant from 1987. I'm like, this is going to be tough. But, and I wrote it third person past tense, and then I ended up rewriting it first person present because it just, I couldn't connect. But so that was a tough one for me. So is it at all ever point of view with you of like, this person, I just can't get in their head enough?
Well, I definitely have that with some characters where I can't get in their head enough, but I tend to gravitate. I'm trying to think if I've written, I mean, I might have a chapter here and there in past tense, but pretty much all my, even when I'm writing for multiple viewpoints, I write first person present tense because that's just for me the way the story naturally comes out.
Yep, me too.
And that makes it easier for me to get in their head. For some reason, third person just feels too far away for me.
Right.
I don't know.
Well, that first person, first of all, it's fun as hell to write like that because it's just the breakneck speed is like, this is happening right now. I don't know what's around that wall.
Right.
And there's something so exciting about that. I think what's challenging with that too is when you have multiple POVs in that, to have them sound different. That's a struggle for me. I usually only have one point of view throughout the entire book. But sometimes but it sounds like you might have multiple.
I have multiple, and the only time I've ever really had trouble keeping their voices separate was when I was doing two. It was a book, 3 Days Missing. It was two mothers who were the same age, had children the same age, in the same class even. And even though they came from very different circumstances and their lives were very different, they were just not separate enough on the page. So I ended up, I'm typically I write the book chronologically. So I write chapter 1, 2, 3, and I write from an outline. So I know exactly what's coming in the next chapters. But that particular book, and I could only do it because I had an outline. I ended up writing one mother, like 4 or 5 chapters in her voice. And then I'd get tired of her. And then I'd go back and write 4 or 5 chapters of the other mothers, pieces, and then I would thread them through.
Okay.
But like I said, I could do that because I knew what the chapters were going to be and what they were supposed to be and where I was going.
And so then backing up, so then you said you left Tennessee and went to Atlanta for college. What did you major in?
Psychology, which I mean, I guess you use that some in writing, right? To get in the character.
You're writing psychological thrillers. It's like, I'm sure there's a good background there.
Yeah, and like why people do things, and what their villain origin story could be, and things like that. I mean, so I do think it's helpful to get into their heads and really understand motivations and all the things that you need to know.
Humanizing them, right? To the extent, because nobody wants a black and white villain. They want or a black and white hero. They want flawed, damaged people, and one leans one way, one leans the other way. But so I'm sure having a background in psychology at least gives you some more flavor for that.
Yeah, I think so. Not that I really remember much.
Right.
It was
It's
so
like taking a
long ago.
foreign language.
So, but yeah, so I think it's helpful. And yeah, and I loved it then and I love it now in a very different way.
Right, right. So did you go on to postgraduate work or?
I did not. And part of the reason I kind of burned out in the whole psychology
Mhm.
field as I was, coming out of college. And then I met my husband who's Dutch and we weren't married at the time, but he was like, I have to go back to Holland. And he was working on his master's degree at the time. And he was like, I have to go back and, finish my thesis and graduate. You want to come? It'll be like a
Mm.
12-month stint. And then
Wow.
we ended up sticking for 12 years. So
Wow.
I had a degree basically where I couldn't really do much with. So I
Yeah.
had to, either I could have gone on and, gone back to school and gotten, a higher degree and worked in psychology, but by then I kind of already decided I didn't want to. So I ended up in nonprofit fundraising for years and years. And that's what I did until we
In
moved back to
in
the
in
States.
Amsterdam.
In Holland. Yeah.
So
We
you
were,
established residency through you got married and established residency that way, and vice
yep.
versa, I assume, for
Yep.
when you came back.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. 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 And it was awesome. I mean, because he's Dutch, we were living the Dutch life. So I learned language,
Oh wow.
I was even working in Dutch at one point. And yeah, and both of our kids were born there, which means they have both passports, which is nice. And our son is actually living there now. So
Oh wow.
yeah, so it's
That's
a
very
very,
cool.
very, half our lives are in Holland. All his family is still there, and half
That's
of our family.
fantastic.
So.
And so then you came back after 12 years, and then what?
Came back after 12 years and actually was working here in nonprofit fundraising, worked for the YWCA here in Atlanta, and then moved into consulting for local nonprofits and a couple who were coming to town to do project-based work. And I was doing all that and, happy doing it. I enjoyed my job, really liked it. But I always, like I said, stories were always this thing in my life. And I always thought, I might have a story to tell, maybe two. I don't know. And then in 2008, the crash came and I literally lost all my clients overnight. I mean, they just, the consultants were the first people that they sent home. So
Yep.
I woke up one morning without a job and my kids were a little bit older at the time. I thought, I can go out and find another job. I could certainly find something to do, but maybe this is, a nudge from the universe to do this
Hmm.
thing that I've always thought that I might really enjoy doing. So I sat down at my computer and I thought, I have no idea how
Hmm.
to write a book. I mean, reading is one thing, but like piecing together a story and all the million things you have to know about, like building character and creating conflict and internal motivations and external motivations. And I mean, there's just so much to know. So,
But don't you think that it's almost better? Because it's funny. I came out of consultancy. I started writing with zero background in it. It just, something happened one day and I just started writing. And it was such a benefit that I didn't know all those things, because that's overwhelming. If you start reading books on like how to write, how to do outlines, how to do plot structure, you'll never do it because it's not coming from kind of this
right.
organic place, I think.
Yeah. It did feel really overwhelming in the beginning, but my brain needs a roadmap. And that's why I'm a plotter too. My brain needs a roadmap. So I did spend some time, not so much like thinking through the structure of my book, but learning how to structure a book. You need the tent poles, you need an inciting incident, you need all these things. And so, I mean, I think it felt really easy once I figured it out I mean, it felt not easy, but maybe natural how to structure a book because I'd read so many and I knew, without knowing it was called an inciting incident. I knew something started the story, right?
Right. Where's the tension? Right.
Yeah. So, all those things that I learned. And then for me, what took the longest and what I spent the most time kind of spinning my wheels on is like, what are the kinds of stories I want to tell? What's my voice? I mean, it took me a minute to figure that out. And I had a couple of false starts with stories, but they call them practice books for a reason.
For sure. I've had several of them.
Right. And still occasionally hit a practice book, right?
Yeah. And
like
it's hard to say because you have what, 9 published novels?
I have 9 published novels, and that includes a co-written one. And then I'm about to turn in my next solo, and we just turned in our next co-written. So that's officially 11.
Yeah. So I'm 8 going on 9. And I can't tell you, like, okay, it was book 4 where I found my voice. I don't know, but it certainly has changed over time.
Absolutely.
And I feel like that doesn't mean it gets better or that's my permanent voice, but it is weird that it just kind of shifts, and it depends on what you're going through in your own life and how you're absorbing the world at that particular point in time. I mean, I used to write much darker stuff than I write, even though my stuff is pretty dark. It used to be more horror, and I'm like, I don't want to do that. Domestic suspense is much more actually scary to me.
Yeah, it's funny because I keep getting darker according to my readers. I don't feel like I'm getting darker, but maybe, I don't know. They say that I am, and I think part of it had to do with the pandemic and all the crap, that we were all going through.
Some people went the opposite direction and wrote I had this discussion with Wendy Walker about this. We both wrote kind of nice stories, like nice stories during the pandemic. And now my editor's like, what is this? I'm like, I don't know.
I don't know.
This is way too hopeful.
We need like vocabulary around like, visual artists and painters and things like that. They have their blue period. They have their whatever period. We need our dark period, our crazy pants period. I don't know what else.
So it's interesting to me, and you're not the only person who has said this about 2008, 2009, losing their job and that being the inciting incident to write a book. It would be easy and probably frivolous to say, had that not happened, you wouldn't have written a book. Because I think that it's still, I mean, you meet people, I'm sure, all the time who are like, oh, I've always wanted to write a book. And you're like, why don't you?
Yeah,
because it's fucking hard. But you still, you kind of, I find it interesting when somebody looks at that kind of idea of writing a story and be like, all right, I'm literally going to sit down and do it and go through it. It's like saying, I'm going to write, music, and I have no idea how to write music. I can't conceptualize that.
Right.
So what did that first draft, when you had that first draft, where were you getting feedback at this point?
So and this is one of, when people who want to write books say, what's your advice? And this is my first advice. It's like, find people in your same shoes and, form a coven with them.
People who will be honest.
But so I had some author friends, and, they didn't all necessarily write in the same genre as me. And I didn't really even quite know exactly what my genre was. My first 2 books kind of straddled the line between women's fiction and like a domestic-y suspense. But I wasn't quite sure where I was going with my first book yet. It was also a lot lighter at the time than what it ended up when it was published. So, but I found authors who were, wannabe authors, people like me who were serious about, like, this is my new career, and we would just exchange stuff. We would get together. They also held me accountable, which I think is really important in the beginning, because, like, before you have an agent, before you even have a book, like, you're writing for yourself and no one else.
Right.
And I'm a stubborn
gal.
Schedule,
no deadline.
None.
Right.
I'm a stubborn gal. So I treated it like a job, and I really, tried to, I gave myself deadlines. I tried to, adhere to word counts, all the things that you're supposed to do when you're, you have a real for sure deadline. And I just really treated it like I was serious about it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's probably the most pivotal advice for a aspiring author is to treat it like a job.
Yeah.
And, write every day,
Yeah.
however much it is, and don't wait for the muse, and don't expect it to all be fun, because sometimes it's like data entry and you're miserable, and it
really
does
sucks.
sometimes it's just really like, I hate this scene, but I know I have to write. I know it needs to be here, but it's so whatever. Or you're just not in the mood. You're just like, because it's mentally taxing to sit down and be in a different world.
I don't know how your brain works, but mine, when I'm in a story, if I put it down for a day, then it takes me half a day to get back into it when I pick it back up. So I try to touch my story every day, even if it's just reading over what I read the day before.
Right.
But at one point you're like, I am so sick of this book. I just want to be done.
At many points.
At many points. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't outline, and that's kind of the thrill for me, is like, so I look forward to, like, I write it usually around 5 o'clock at night is when I sit down, and I look forward to that all day. I'm like, what happens now? And sometimes I don't know, and that's the part that sucks. But it's like when the synapses fire, and you just have that one idea, like, I never would have thought of this had I outlined it. But that's how my brain works. I just can't. I'm not as creative. I can't think of all those details. So I'm always impressed and kind of stunned by somebody who's like, yeah, I know exactly how this story is going to go. And I know everybody has, room for twists and turns that may organically creep in, but I can't wrap my head around that kind of mindset. So kudos to you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I don't know how, and for me, it's the other way around. Like, I don't know how two things, how you keep everything straight, because there's so many moving pieces in the kind of stories that we write. Right. And like, how do you know for sure that the pieces are all going to fall together in the end? That's the other part. I would be scared that I would hit a wall and not know how to finish the story.
Yeah, I've definitely hit that wall several times. But that's, in a way, it's kind of fun, because you're just like, I've just given myself the world's biggest puzzle, and I'm the only person who's allowed to figure it out. And you got to, not only you have to solve the puzzle, you can't make it be so unbelievable. Like, you can't make it be easy to solve, because you just created these threads of incredulity. So, but that, to me, it's a challenge. Like, what is that challenge? So, and I feel like I'm constantly just writing, what if this happened right now?
Mm-hmm.
I've killed off main characters just on a whim, just because I'm like, what if this happened right now? What would that mean? You write it and just see it. Maybe you go back and delete it all. But to me, that's fun, because it just totally turns the story on its head.
Yeah. So how many words do you throw away then in a typical story? I don't mind throwing words away when it's necessary, but I don't want to write into a corner where I know I can't get myself out of.
Yeah, there's a difference between what I throw away because of my edits, and then what I throw away after I get, like, my editorial comments. But probably anywhere between 5 and 10,000.
That's not bad.
Not a huge amount out of an 85,000 word manuscript or so.
Yeah.
And so it's not too bad. But so what was the process then so you have this book? Did you have any thought about ever self-publishing, or you're just like, no, I need that independent, third party,
Yeah, I never really considered self-publishing, not because I don't believe in any of the self-publishing, everything that everybody says about self-publishing, good and bad. Some people do really well at it.
Sure.
And they are great at marketing themselves and great at, being out there. But I just know, for me, that it would feel like a real chore to market all by myself, to have to deal with, all the millions of things that your publisher does that you would have to do yourself when you're self-publishing. So I knew that route was not for me.
And there's also, especially when you don't have, an established history of being a writer, if your very first thing, this is my opinion, if your very first thing is self-published, you don't really get that validation of, like, it, and that's not to say there's plenty of garbage that gets published traditionally, and there's plenty of self-published stuff that's fantastic.
Yeah. Agreed.
But for me, I was so insecure about everything. And because there's so much rejection, I'm like, I need an industry participant
Yep.
to take a chance on me.
Yep.
And that would at least give me some kind of confidence. And
Yeah.
because it is a soul shattering industry by
Right.
and
And
large.
also, for me, it was something about I wanted to see my books in like the big bookstores, not
Totally.
just online. I wanted to hold it in my hand, walk into, Barnes and Noble or an indie
Show
or,
your
you
kids.
know,
Yep.
yeah, and just hold it in my hand. And so that for me was a real big consideration as well.
That was my everything I did was in goals. Like if I just get an agent, then I'll
Yep.
I'll be happy. And then it became if I could just, and it was like to have one book published and have it be, and there was Borders at the time and Barnes and Noble, and to have my kids see it on the
Yes.
shelf. Like
Right.
then I could die, I could put that on my tombstone. That'd be great. And then you keep going with your goals. But like that, like when you like the first time you receive your physical galleys,
I was a mess,
like that's the craziest thing ever. And
right?
you're like, this is the book.
This is it. It's in physical form. Yeah,
I
it's
know.
crazy. And isn't it funny how, like, when you, like you said, when you're first starting out, like your first goal is just to get published, right? And your goals you keep moving the goalposts, and you think like getting published is the beginning, is what you think the goal at the time, but it really is just the beginning because
Right.
every career has ups and downs, and some books do better than others, and it's always it's always a challenge because you want to grow, and you want each book to be better, and not just be better but maybe do better as well.
Right.
So
And the industry is fraught with, pitfalls of like, okay, I might have done well. And then if the next book really tanks for whatever reason, that might shy away by publisher, other potential. I mean, it's crazy, and nothing is in perpetuity in the publishing industry, and it's not like you said, nothing is linear at all. It is all ups and downs,
and one flop can be like the end with your publisher. I mean, it
right. Do I
depends on
change
the
my name for the next book? Do I, all that stuff? I mean, it's and
terrifying.
you come to it from a place of knowing nothing about the industry, and so it's a very opaque industry. So it's fascinating to kind of try to peel back the layers to understand it, but they start to realize like, oh, nobody really understands.
Nobody knows what we're doing.
Even the publishers, they're like, we don't know, we hope this is going to be a hit. Yeah, of course we don't know. And so it is a very scary thing. And I think a goal ultimately becomes, I want to write full time. And I'm not doing that right now because I have a fantastic job. But, very few people realize how tough it is to be kind of the sole breadwinner of your household, writing
Yeah.
and making, a decent enough income to be comfortable. It's
I mean,
almost impossible.
it's almost impossible. It really is. And, just it's because you never know what your commissions are going to be or your advances. And you
Right. And
just
again,
don't
like you
know.
said, you could have one fantastic book, make a ton of money on it, but that's not an annual salary that you're getting.
Right. You better sock that money away because you don't know when it's coming next.
Right. Right. And then obviously insurance and all that kind of stuff. So it's difficult, and sometimes it's good to be ignorant about it, but the realities are pretty stark. And there's few people I know who really have just hit the jackpot,
Right.
and can just mint gold every time they submit something to their editor. So, but
Agreed.
you're on your way. You're pretty much there. So that's
I
that's
mean, surely
awesome.
after 11 books, right?
But so your output has been pretty phenomenal. If you started writing in earnest in 2009, say, and so you're a book a year essentially, while having what you said, a couple practice books. And so did that very first book turn into something?
It did. It did. The first book that I was like made it all the way to the end. I rewrote it a whole bunch of times. But yeah, that book eventually became actually was my second book because then I started writing my real second book, and that's The Last Breath, which which was my debut. And as soon as I started writing that book, I knew, I was like, this is the one that's going to get me an agent. This is the one that's going to, get me noticed, because it was just a little hookier. It was just one of those stories that I thought, this one is different enough from what is out there currently. So that is eventually what happened too.
And what was I'm always curious about people's drive as well. What was the drive at that point? You had written that first book. Was it this goal of seeing a book published, as opposed to, oh my God, I love telling stories and I want to get better at it and I want to do this?
Yeah. It was both those things. And then I'll also add to the mix that I've said this earlier, I'm a stubborn gal. So,
Right.
when I set my mind to something, I'm like, I'm just going to keep going until it happens. And so it was a little both, but I think that, what you said about I want to get better and I want to learn and deepen my craft and all those things. That's, I think, what is going to keep an author chugging along, even despite the occasional book that doesn't do so well, or a publisher that drops you, or, an editor that quits and moves away right before your book comes out. I mean, that's happened too.
Yep.
So, that's what's gonna, and I think it's, for me, it's like, despite all the crap that goes on in this industry and at publishing houses, and, you can read it all in the papers yourself, but like, keep your head down, think about your story and make sure it's the best story that you can write. And,
and approach it with like humility in a way, right? Where when you do get that feedback from valuable sources, to have respect for it and to be grateful for it, because even though somebody just handed you 3 extra months of work, their comments, if it's your editor, their comments are probably spot on.
Right. And, the way I try to, and, it always hurts to open those editorial letters, some more than others, but it's always a scary moment, right? And you're like, how many pages? I don't know. How many is it? Single space, double space?
Right.
But I always try to keep in mind that their goal is to make this the best book as I can make it too.
Right.
So it's a group effort. We're all on the, same page when it comes to, we want this book to shine as much as we can make it shine. So I try not to take it personally. Most things I don't take personally.
Have you ever had the email before the editorial letter that says, hey, can we talk about this?
Oh God.
And I'm like, oh shit. like no, give me the 16-page editorial letter. That'll probably be better than like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah. No, I've never had that, but I do have at the end of, if you need to discuss, let's schedule a Zoom, or,
Right.
have a conversation.
And it is so much fun talking to other authors about the editorial letter, because everybody has that same shared experience of like, clicking on it and like, do I read this whole thing right now? And I finally get to the point where it's so easy to get overwhelmed, but I look at it, I'm like, okay, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I know I can do this.
Right.
And once you have that kind of confidence, then it allows you to move on, because otherwise, man, you could just curl up fetal position.
No joke, especially the real big rewrites. But I will say, and I know you're not a plotter, but I will say the plotting helps, because there's never any surprises.
Yeah.
When I send them my book, it's pretty much what we agreed on all those months ago. They don't always remember, and maybe I don't execute it the way that they think that I should be executing it. But I mean, there are never really any plot surprises.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's totally fair. And I wish I could plot so I could do that, because after 9-10 books, you write well. That they're not going to be like, this sounds like crap, even though we agreed on the plot. That's never going to be the problem. The problem is always going to be either the plot, or maybe you weren't able to write the character in a way that let them, attach themselves to them enough. Like,
right.
That's a little bit more nuanced, but yeah, mine is always the plot.
Structure. Sometimes, I get hung up on that. But I mean, typically it's not a really big surprise for anyone when I turn it in.
Well, we're going to wrap up. But speaking of surprises, before I let you go, we're going to do a quick little storytelling ourselves. And I've got 3 books that I just kind of picked off my bookshelves. I think these are all galleys. And you're going to choose one of them. And we're going to choose a random sentence from a random page. I'm going to read that sentence. And then you give me a couple more sentences of what might happen next. And I'll do a couple more. And in like 2 minutes, we'll call it quits. There's no outlining ability here.
Oh, God.
This is pure winging it, and it's going to be a shit show. I can guarantee it. But I do it all the time, so it's fun. I've got Where She Went by Kelly Simmons.
Okay.
The Network by Elsie Shaw, and Julie Clark's book, The Lies.
I read that one.
Yep.
I haven't read the other 2.
So choose one of those.
Let's do the first one, Kelly Simmons.
Okay, and give me a page between 1 and 270.
81.
Okay, so I will quickly look at this page and just find a sentence that might be good to start with.
Is it weird that I'm nervous?
No, I'm nervous every time, and I've done this like 80 times. Let's see. How about all right. It was still spitting rain on and off, but she knew guys didn't care about that.
And now I give a sentence, and then
unless you want me to start, I'm happy to go first too.
But she knew guys didn't care about that. We're going scary. We're going dark, right?
It could be rom-com. It could be a poem.
Well, I don't know a poem.
It could be whatever you want it to be.
Okay, so let's guys didn't care about that, but she did, and she also cared about the figure at the end of the street running towards them.
She turned to her boyfriend and said, "Is that who I think it is?" He looked over and said, "I don't think so. This guy's much bigger."
What kind of weapons do you have in that bag? He pulled the backpack from his shoulder and pulled open the zipper. That's 2 pulls. I know. I'm the queen of echoes.
She tried to look inside, but it was too dark. But they were running out of time because whoever this person was, he was closing on them fast. For some reason, her boyfriend didn't even reach into the bag, so she did. She pulled out a hunting knife that almost slid her on the palm as she grabbed it.
He's close enough that they can see his face. I don't know. Who's it going to be? Who should it be? Or they could see it. He's close enough that they could see his face, except he's wearing a dark hood, creating a dark shadow. He reaches into the pocket of his coat and pulls out a gun against a knife. "We're screwed," she said.
"Why won't you do anything?" she asked her boyfriend, and he just stood there in a catatonic state, riddled with fear. And she knew this was one of those moments, perhaps the only moment of her life she would ever have just like this. Like when you get into a car accident and you're sliding off and you don't know if you're going to be alive on the other side. She had to move. She didn't know who this person was, but if she didn't do something first, they were both going to be killed.
Or wait, maybe it's not fear on her boyfriend's face. Maybe it's recognition. Maybe he knows who this person is. She squinted into the darkness, and he's closing on them now, only a few feet. And she looks again. Wait a minute, is that your brother?
I think we call it there. If we continued, I would have had her accidentally kill the brother. I feel really terrible about it. That was good.
Editing, and maybe a little bit of zhuzhing up, but
yeah,
I think it's a good one.
This is the first draft, obviously. But it's good. It's fun. I like, I say this every time. It's fun. Like, you have to accept what I tell you, and I have to accept your premise, and we just build upon it. And sometimes it goes into some really interesting places. And sometimes you have like kind of you do it enough, you start to have a mind meld with the other, like, oh, we're totally seeing
Like, I know where you're going with
Yeah,
this. Yeah.
totally. Well, that was fantastic. And congratulations on your recent release. And it sounds like you've got always books in the pipeline.
Yeah. Just chugging them out.
Awesome. What a pleasure it was to talk to you. I really appreciate you
thank
taking the
for having
time.
me.
And this made my day. It was a really great
Same
conversation.
here.
All
It was
right.
awesome talking to you.
Take care, Kimberly.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
So that's it. That was my conversation with Kimberly Belle, and we squeaked out a pretty suspenseful story at the end. There was just about to be a good amount of blood, I think. So kind of left it on a little bit of a cliffhanger. I hope you want to go learn more about Kimberly and buy her books, and so please visit her website at KimberlyBelleBooks.com. Again, her most recent release is The Personal Assistant. And if you want to buy my books or find out more about me, just please go to my website, carterwilson.com. And that is it for now. More episodes, as always, coming out very soon. In the meantime, as always, I appreciate all you folks listening and or watching to this. Take care.